Thank you, Ms. Amos. Thank you for taking this interview with China Daily. And we're just wondering, because you said yesterday Asian countries should take a leading role in the future's emergency response. So I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what kind of qualifications that Asian countries now are holding, or we can say that why they're capable enough to lead this mission in the future?
Well, they're already doing a great deal because, of course, within this region, within the Asia-Pacific region, you have a lot of countries that face a lot of natural disasters, from earthquakes through typhoons, flooding. We're seeing right now what is happening in Thailand, in Cambodia, Vietnam and elsewhere in terms of flooding. So many countries have already taken the lead in terms of putting in place preparedness measures at the local level, at the national level, and also at the regional level. And I think that we can build on that, use, for example, the example of China and the work that has been done here, building national capacity. Over the years, China is one of the countries that has really focused on how can China itself respond more effectively to natural disasters. So how can we build on China's experience and use it in the region and elsewhere to help countries prepare more effectively?
So you're mainly talking about the experience and in the previous years for Asian countries, but I'm just wondering, how about the other factors, like, finance or international status or a long-term running system? How do you think about
Or
this?
a long-term?
The running system, the operation system.
If you're looking at natural disasters, you have to remember that if you're really going to save lives, what happens at the local level and the extent to which local people, local authorities are prepared and understand what they need to do, that is absolutely critical, because these are the people who respond immediately. They're right there. Then, of course, you get the national authorities who come in behind that as quickly as they can. And the third level of response is the international community, who will support national and local efforts. So this is why the local response is so important. And we've seen it in countries where, post a tsunami, for example, where people are trained and understand that they need to go to higher ground, that you will save lives in the first instance. Of course, what happens at the national level in terms of preparing communities, looking at things like planning laws, is critical. If you have a major disaster, as in the case of Haiti or Pakistan, which requires an international response as well, funding is critical. But funding at the national level, China has invested a huge amount in terms of the resources it itself has put into preparing the country and the regions in the country to deal more effectively with disasters. So the international system is critical, but the local and national system is critical as well.
So how do you perceive, the emergency aid from Chinese government this time to the Horn of Africa? And someone is criticizing that, the Western countries is gradually putting the international aid aside, and China should take more responsibility. How do you perceive this?
It's not about one country taking more responsibility than another. I think it's about all countries recognizing that where you have a major crisis, a major humanitarian crisis, and there are people who are in desperate need, that there is a responsibility to try to help those people. And that help comes in a range of different forms. It can be through the United Nations, what we call the multilateral system, particularly help through the appeals, where we try to raise money for not only UN agencies, but international and local NGOs. It can come through help in kind, through supporting the national government, for example. It can come through technical support with people, or it can come in the term of longer-term assistance in helping a country to rebuild. So help and support comes in a variety of different forms, and countries will choose the method that best suits them and suits their interests.
So as we can see, in recent international emergencies, Chinese government is trying to fulfill its international obligations, but someone criticizes that, China lacks a long-term operational international aid system. Is that true? How do you think about that?
Well, I think that that's something that the Chinese government are looking at. Earlier this year, they published the white paper on foreign aid. I think that there are discussions going on within the country about how that aid should be exercised in the future. National governments will make these decisions.
So from your point of view, what barriers or challenges are there for Chinese government in future humanitarian crisis tackling?
Well, I think for the Chinese government, the geographic diversity in the country and really getting a sense of where crises may occur and thinking about how to plan to respond to those will be one of the things that the government is thinking about. Obviously, the government is also making a contribution globally through the Central Emergency Response Fund, but also through its bilateral support to various governments. But I think the question on the challenges for the Chinese government should be addressed to the government rather than to me.
Mm-hmm. So a follow-up question to this one, a bit similar. I just came back from the Horn of Africa and I saw the situation, the dire situation there. So in your opinion, what African governments should do to sustain themselves rather than receiving international aid to tackle its humanitarian crisis?
Well, if you look at the Horn of Africa crisis, there are very many different dimensions to this. You have the famine in Somalia, which is partly a result of the conflict, which has been going on in that country since 1991. And conflict exacerbates other things. So it's exacerbated the drought, the fact that you have such a poor security environment in many parts of the country, that aid agencies aren't necessarily able to reach the people who are most in need. And you have had people fleeing over the border into Kenya and into Ethiopia. So the thing that's most important for Somalia is peace and stability. If you have peace and stability, you can begin to think about the longer-term economic growth of the country. In Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Djibouti, of course, you have longer-term poverty, which has to be addressed. These are countries that over the years have been looking at putting in place measures to actually build the capacity and the resilience of the countries to deal with climate change and environmental degradation. But we also recognize that these are countries that used to face severe drought conditions every 10 years, and now they face them every 2 years. So when you have those disasters that come with such frequency, it makes it very, very difficult for countries to build that capacity and to help the communities to respond effectively because they have such a short time in which to do that. So longer-term economic development, making sure that you put in place environmental programs that help to harvest rainwater, for example, how you support pastoralists whose lifestyle is becoming unsustainable. All of these are things that the countries need to look at for the longer term.
Okay. So you have been stressing the significance of stability and peace in Africa, and we know the Somalia security situation is really concerned. So a few days ago I interviewed some senior officials in the African Union. They just said in this specific area, I mean in Somalia case, they were left by international community. So how do you see that? And what kind of efforts should be from the international community to tackle the problems in Somalia now?
Well, I think that Somalia is an extremely complicated security situation, and this is a conflict that has been going on since 1991. You have an African mission force there, AMISOM, which is there to support the TFG, the transitional government. But if you look at the work that I deal with, which is on the humanitarian side, we have nearly 3 million people in south-central Somalia in need of help, and they are in areas which are controlled by Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab is seen as a terrorist organization in some countries in the world, and that has affected the funding which is available for organizations which are trying to work there and to help the people in those parts of the country. You also have significant numbers of people who are fleeing from those areas because of the lack of security and the lack of food, going into Mogadishu, but also crossing the borders into Kenya and Ethiopia. So I don't think that this is a simple crisis to deal with. I'm not sure what was being referred to with respect to that the international community has not sought to support Somalia to sort this out, because I think that over the years, and many efforts have been made, but the security situation is extremely difficult and extremely volatile.
So people are Somalian are leaving their country every day. Where's the future for them?
The future has to be that we try and get peace in that country. That has to be the first step.